Welcome back. I am so thrilled you're joining me for another explainer. Today, we're going to dive into mastering the art of organizational management. And specifically, we are looking at a tool that is absolutely essential for strategic alignment, the business dashboard. Honestly, if you have ever felt completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of metrics floating around your organization, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's kick things off with a slightly provocative question, shall we? Do you have the illusion of absolute control over your business? It's a nice fantasy, isn't it? This idea that we can monitor every single changing variable, every penny, every little process, and guarantee that nothing ever goes off script. But you know as well as I do, the reality of modern business is just filled with uncertainty. We literally can't control everything. And in fact, trying to do so usually leads to a very real, very modern problem: data pollution. We basically end up drowning in numbers without actually knowing where we're going. And this comparison right here brilliantly illustrates the core issue. Think about driving your car. You look down at the dashboard and the relationships are super simple and obvious, right? You press the gas, your speed goes up, your fuel goes down. Simple. But managing a complex business is not like driving a car. It's way more like flying a commercial airplane. In an airplane cockpit, you are dealing with a highly complex system of interacting causal relationships. A drop in pressure affects the temperature, which then affects fuel efficiency, which ultimately impacts your arrival time. You can't just stare at one single dial. You need a system that helps you interpret how all the dials interact to keep the entire plane in the air. Okay, let's map out our flight plan for this explainer. First, moving from data to strategy. Second, traditional versus modern approaches. Third, the balanced scorecard. Fourth, the four perspectives. Fifth, the strategic map. And finally, designing your dashboard. All right, jumping right into section 1, from data to strategy, curing data pollution. So here's the crucial takeaway. Having more data absolutely does not mean having better information. Thanks to all our modern software, companies today track every single daily transaction. But ironically, this abundance can actually paralyze decision makers. The true goal of a control dashboard is to act as a rigorous filter. We need to take that overwhelming data pollution and, well, actually, we need to transform it into scarce, highly relevant, and actionable information. We are looking for those few key indicators, the KPIs, that let us diagnose what is truly strategic. It's all about separating the signal from the noise. Moving on to section 2, traditional versus modern, shifting our mindset. Just look at how this contrasts two entirely different ways of thinking. The traditional approach to control was heavily bureaucratic. It relied on super rigid rules, strict budgets, and, let's be honest, the threat of punishment if you didn't hit your numbers. It was all about controlling the individual. But the modern approach, the one we desperately need for today's dynamic markets, is organic. It uses metrics not as a stick to beat employees with, but as a compass. It leans into values, non-financial metrics, and transparency to foster collective learning and continuous innovation. It's fundamentally about aligning everyone towards a shared collective goal. Which brings us to section 3, the balanced scorecard, essentially our modern cockpit. So you've probably heard of the famous balanced scorecard. It was introduced by Robert Kaplan and David Norton back in the 1990s, and it was a real game changer. Because before this, executives were relying almost entirely on traditional financial indicators. And the problem with financial indicators is that they are basically rearview mirrors. They only tell you what already happened, not what's going to happen next. The balanced scorecard solves this by linking different performance metrics together. It gives executives a fast but incredibly comprehensive view of the whole business, limiting that information overload while making sure no critical area is ignored at the expense of another. All right, section 4, the four perspectives, the interlocking dials. So Kaplan and Norton proposed looking at the business through 4 distinct, interrelated lenses. First up, financial. How do we look to our shareholders? Second, customer. How do our customers actually see us when it comes to time, quality, and service? Third, internal processes. What exactly must we excel at to deliver that value? And fourth, innovation and learning. Can we continue to improve and create value over time? What I absolutely love here is the logical flow of it all. Think about it. Your financial goals dictate the value you have to offer customers. To offer that value, you need excellent internal processes. And to sustain those processes, your people and your infrastructure must continuously learn and grow. It's brilliant. Section 5, the strategic map, visualizing strategy. Now, take a look at this strategic map. This perfectly visualizes those causal relationships we just talked about in action. Notice how it isn't just a boring checklist of goals, it's a dynamic web of cause and effect. If you look down at the bottom, training your people and upgrading your technology directly improves your website's response time. That faster response time leads to a much better customer experience and more web purchases, which ultimately drives up your revenue and maximizes the overall value of the business unit. It beautifully translates high-level strategy into a clear, connected narrative that literally everyone in the company can follow.
Finally, Section 6, Designing Your Dashboard, Building the Architecture.
Here is a reality check. You cannot just go buy a piece of software off the shelf and assume, boom, we have a dashboard. You have to thoughtfully design the architecture. There are 3 key dimensions you have to define here. First, the recipient. Who is actually looking at this thing? The CEO needs a macro view of the entire company, while a line operator on the floor just needs to know their machine's temperature and speed. Second, the scope. Are we measuring one single process, an entire business unit, or the overarching strategy? And third, the uses of the information, which is so important we really need to look at it on its own. How do we actually use this information? Well, yes, we use it to decide and control. That's kind of the baseline level. But the real magic, that happens when we use dashboards to signal and learn. See, when leadership puts a specific metric front and center on the company dashboard, they are actively signaling to the entire organization, hey, this is what matters right now. It totally aligns priorities. Furthermore, watching how these metrics interact allows the organization to learn, spot new trends, and adapt to shifting environments. It completely shifts the culture from just coldly controlling numbers to genuine institutional learning. To really prove how powerful this is, let me share this fantastic little anecdote from the sources about a chemical plant, the Texas Eastman Company. A department head over there decided to create a daily profit and loss statement for his frontline operators. He showed them exactly how quality, energy consumption, and production volume affected the bottom line, right there in real time. And because they finally had access to this strategic daily data, their behavior completely changed. When a hydrogen compressor failed in the middle of the night, a night shift supervisor didn't just sit around and wait until morning. No way. He immediately dispatched an emergency repair team because he could literally see the financial bleed happening on his dashboard.
And honestly, that right there is the ultimate goal. Empowering action by aligning your data perfectly with your strategy. When your dashboard is designed correctly, it goes so far beyond just being a simple tracking sheet. It becomes a living, coherent roadmap for performance improvement. It limits the endless variables down to the essential few. It makes sure you aren't optimizing one department while accidentally destroying another. And it gives your team the exact feedback they need to drive the business forward. So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this one kind of provocative thought to chew on. If we pulled up your company's dashboard right now, does it tell us your strategy or just your history? Does it look like the overly simple dashboard of a car or the integrated, forward-looking cockpit of an airplane? Take a moment to reflect on the tools your own organization uses. The data is already there, folks, but the strategy is entirely up to you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I will see you next time.